We are here for our webinar entitled Focus Groups for Institutionalizing Operations, How to Gain Support for AEL on Campus. And today we are featuring Dr. Denise Perdue from Odessa College. And so now it gives me great pleasure to introduce the woman of the hour. And this is Dr. Denise Perdue from Odessa College. Dr. Perdue is joining us as the Transitional Learning Center Director from Odessa College. Anyone that knows Dr. Perdue understands the tremendous value that Dr. Perdue places on education. She states that her intent throughout her scholarly and professional career has been to pursue invigorating and fulfilling academic challenges, to engage in collegial coaching and advocacy, to problem solve and mediate, and to consistently learn. Her uncompromising stance is that all populations can transform and reimagine their lives in a positive learning environment. Dr. Perdue is knowledgeable of current issues relating to the 21st century literacy development, particularly in the non-traditional aged student, and has developed a reputation as an effective literacy strategist amongst colleagues. She establishes literacy cultures through pedagogy and andragogy awarenesses, learning support services, and a wide range of inclusion modalities that enrich department operations, curriculum, research, and commitments to community service and growth. Dr. Perdue is particularly attentive toward the development of written and oral communication skills, program development, and assessment identifiers associated with adult literacy deficiencies, and faculty mentoring support networks, which assist her in cultivating a transformational learning environment. She has been in adult education all of her adult life and all of her academic career. Dr. Perdue holds a doctorate of education in post-secondary education and leadership and a master's in science, human development, and leadership with her professional specialization in higher education. She also holds a bachelor's of integrated studies in education. Her research interests include 21st century literacy development, adult learning communities, and access and program development for the non-traditional aged student. Once again, I'm really pleased to have Dr. Denise Perdue from Odessa College.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you so much for joining me and allowing me this opportunity to talk about education, but more importantly, also to talk about Odessa College and some really interesting things that we did while we were here. Let me back up just a little bit and just to tell you, this is about focusing on institutionalization and how we were able to begin that process here at OC. And there's a little bit, let me move to the next screen. There's a little bit that you need to know as well. I'll introduce myself, but these are some focus things that we're going to talk about today. I do want to also have some integrate in there some options for you as well, that I don't want you all to sit back either and just listen in, chime in. This is really a discussion period and asking me a lot of questions, just as I'll ask you some questions on what's happening at your institution as well in terms of where you are with institutionalizing. What does that mean to institutionalize? Is it really valuable? Is it important? Why is it necessary to the 21st century of our educational era and our culture and our climate, et cetera? So I really want to have a conversation. What could happen, quite frankly, though, is that I do a lot of talking and I don't integrate you in your thoughts into the conversation. That's super important to me. So just as you have some notebooks with you, I certainly have them on my end as well to take really good notes on what it is that you would like to talk about. And then what are you something or things that I can also do as we're still continuing this process. So I'm going to introduce myself a little bit so you'll know a little bit about me and why this was some of the practices. You'll see what happened during that integration process, and because of my background. We're also going to talk about the definition of institutionalization. You'll know that we're educators, so we're going to come with some educational background with that and some theoretical practices and who wrote about it. So we're going to use some educational definitions here to bring that forth. The other is we're going to talk also briefly, and it's really going to be briefly this time. Stephen Covey, I believe in his theory in that you begin with the end in mind. What did I want at the end? Those steps that I'm going to take in order for me to get there. I really believe that premise. And because of that, I think that we've done some good or made some good steps forward in institutionalizing. We're also going to talk about some really challenging, it's very difficult for me, I'll be honest with you, to talk about the challenges in bringing this to fruition. So we're going to talk a lot about what it was like for me upon arriving into this department. I did some analyses. So I'm going to talk about those. So it's analyses of the department, did an analysis of the college as a whole and how we were referenced with the college. Really going to also talk about with TWC and how we were in alignment with TWC. And then with faculty and staff, we're going to look at their knowledge base of higher education, adult education, and with TWC, do we know those sorts of things? What do they mean, et cetera? Going to talk about the campus visit. That's what brought this institutionalization to fruition. It's a huge component of that, but also remember, we're going to talk about some steps that led up to that as well. And finally, we're going to look at the outcome from this great venture that took place. So hang on in there and then bring in your questions as well. Let's have some good conversation because we're doing some great work in this region and in this state as a whole. We are going to be leaders. We're going to stay there with adult education and literacy. And because of our integration, our unity together, our communication together, our camaraderie together, we're going to do some really great things and be a leading state in how we provide services for those that are entering into the 21st century for education. So as I promised, here we go. What is institutionalization? Allow me, please, to read this to you because, you know, as educators, we're going to find that text that talks about what it is that we're wanting to do. So this one speaks to me heavily and accurately. Institutionalization. It is a process of embedding learning that has occurred by individuals and groups into the institutions of the organization, including systems, structures, procedures, and strategy. It couldn't be more seamless than that. This was my begin with the end in mind, needed to see this at the end of this process. Institutionalization. Why is it important? What difference does it make? Why do we need to do that? So what is important to me is that it's the enlargement of responsibility. So it takes us out of this cocoon, if you will, of being in this little circle of influence that we have, and it expands it out. And it allows our students to see the enlargement. So we're no longer simply focused on a terminal GED degree or a terminal ESL certificate in level 6 or a terminal transition phase in terms of we're going to build their academic skills and their social skills and their community skill levels, et cetera. No, we're going to bridge that over, we're going to enlarge it to an institution that has a plethora of opportunities and also that enriches the cultural environment of learning. So our students will get to migrate over, they'll continue on, and then they get into the workplace. And throughout this seamless transitioning, we've enlarged their perspective literally on what they value and what they can do. So it's an enlargement opportunity. It orients the individuals to their fullest academic and professional potential. Potential is the key word here. And it's important that our students realize that at the very beginning, when they first come in, they've got a lot of questions, but they also don't have questions yet to ask because they really don't know. So institutionalizing gives them that opportunity to become their fullest, to develop their fullest potential and begin to ask those significant, pertinent questions on academia. It places a premium on intellectual standards, a premium on that. We have to teach them ongoing queries, always asking a question. What does that mean? How do I do that? Why is that important? How does this connect to something else? So there, we can build that as we institutionalize, because it's not a terminal being in some of our departments. It encourages individuals to move from thought to action. I've often told people in our department that whenever the student walks onto the campus, they have made a monumental decision to say, there's something that I need. I want more of something. I'm hoping that you can provide that, because I don't know what to ask. I'm not really certain that I know the direction that I really want to go. But because we're institutionalizing it, we're going to answer it from the very beginning, from the moment they call, walk in the door. This is before COVID, of course. But by the time they call, we will have that plan laid out for them. That's why institutionalizing is important. They know from the time they call to the time that they walk off the stage into an employable high wage earning job, that we thought of them before their arrival. That's really significant. It also, institutionalization, oh my goodness, it addresses countervailing pressures that resist change. You and I both know that not only students, but faculty and staff, the change is hard. We don't necessarily want to do that. How do we know they're going to get a job? How do we know that what we're providing is going to be the best for them to be able to migrate into the community? How do we know? And there's personal pressures, and then there's financial pressures, and then there's political pressures that they have. Well, institutionalizing them addresses those as they migrate through. So the importance of that is key here. Those countervailing pressures are there. We know that they're real, but we can address them through our seamless transitioning process. All right, so this is the hard part, so bear with me on this part. It's going to talk a little bit, or quite significantly, about what I found. So the important thing for you to remember is I'm going to introduce myself a little bit. It's important that you know I'm not from Texas. You Texans are, special people. I just think you all are amazing. I really do. However, I came in on an edic position. What does that mean? I'm not from Texas. I'm also not from TEA, Texas Educational Association. I did not teach in the K-12 system in TEA or any other place. I've always been in adult education. I also didn't know about Texas Workforce Commission's practices. I didn't know a lot about what was going on and how this department was functioning upon my arrival. My practices came from higher education. I taught and trained a lot of K-12 faculty members in terms of them understanding what's needed in higher education, but I didn't teach in the K-12 system at all. I chose specifically to be in higher education. I chose intentionally to be in the community college, and I chose intentionally to work with adult learners. All of that was intentional from the very beginning of my career in seeking out the degrees that I have. Coming to Texas aligned with all that I had agreed upon. It has literacy development challenges that I wanted to address. It has people here that were a part of a college that believed in the values that I placed so heavily on education from K-12 through K-18 and into the employment realm. It had all of the elements of people, of challenges, of academia and wanting to do better and build the community. All of that was here. So why not? Why not come here? However, what I found when I came was challenging on my part, so I want to share that with you. It's important that you know the challenges and what I saw. Now remember too, I'm coming in, this is what I saw, not based upon what I was told. This is what I came in with, a notepad, pencil, paper, looking at what was going on within the department. In terms of institutionalizing, remember that's my goal. What did I find from faculty? So I found that faculty members had degrees, they did, but they weren't necessarily teaching in the area of their degree. That was significant for me. Atomization of knowledge and community building of ESL and GED program was not really existent there. The other portion is Texas Education Agency and Culture was here fully. Love TEA in the department. Lots of practices were here. We'll talk about that extensively later as well. But the practices were here, the environment was here, the entire ethos of K-12 was within the department. So I walked in and felt as though, in a way, if you can imagine, that I was in a K-12 institution. The language, the conversations, the knowledge base was based upon K-12. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. It wasn't familiar to me. And coming into higher education and wanting to be a part of adult education and literacy, that was something that I knew that I needed to address. So I made note of that. For the college, institutionalization, how close were we with migrating with them? So they gave us, we did have in the department, their support. What we had were classrooms. We did have them scattered sporadically throughout the campus. We had marketing on our side. We could have used them more than what we were using them more, but we had access to that. We also were given a local budget, which was really significant. Continuing education and workforce, our students had the opportunity to migrate through to get additional certificates. We just weren't using them as fully as we could within the department. We're also responsible, and those 6 locations, they weren't being all met. And I'll talk about what that means when we get to the TWC portion as well. All right, champions, this is the other thing, institutionalizing findings. What did I find with how adult education? Did they know about adult ed and literacy, higher education, and workforce development? The department held little knowledge. When I say it was just a little bit of knowledge of the mission. What is the mission of adult education and literacy? What is the mission of higher education? What is the mission of TWC? What are we trying to do here? The other was there was little to no communication to outside agencies. That was a challenge as well. And then there was not a lot of interest on the campus in getting our students into the workforce, into getting them to working. So these are a couple of things I want you to think about in terms of what I'm stating here is for you. If you want, put in the chat as well, did you find this when you arrived? When you first started, even if you arrived years ago, are you still finding that the people in your department, in your sphere of influence, and those that you're working alongside, do you find that they're still not quite certain of what adult ed is, of what we're supposed to be doing? What is our mission? Put in the chat too, I wish I could do this with those that are within the department, but I'm really not certain how to go about doing that. Put in the chat as well, I would like to get more training on how to introduce higher education into adult education that aligns with workforce initiatives. How do I do that seamlessly? And is it important that we really do that? I'm going to say yes to that. We're part of the 21st century. We're also part of a technology-driven global market. It's really important that we get our students ready and walking into these eras, this culture, ready to be an impact on that environment. Let me share a couple of things with you as well. Does the premise of the community college gain value the more we talk about it? So as we migrate through from our particular areas of adult ed, is it important that the community college also migrate over to the adult education side and understand our? Yes. Does higher education need to understand what Texas Workforce Commission does, what their practices are? Yes, it does. All of this is linked together to benefit the student holistically. Institutionalizing is this practice in order for us to get there. All right. What were the findings from TWC? Well, this was funny. You all might chuckle about this, but I arrived here on a Friday. And on Monday, I was in a room with officials from TWC by phone. And then later in the week, it was in person. And we were not in good shape then. So we were facing deobligation. We were not in compliance in multiple measures. We were in that red zone across the board. Primarily. It was so hard to see. However, the positive portion out of this is TWC was there, ready to work with us, ready to hear, but also we needed to have an action in plan. We had to be ready to hear, literally, and do some of the things that they were asking us to do. So this is the funny portion of that is I don't know, don't tell our program specialist this, but I remember on the phone call when she was asking, so what are all of you going to be doing? What is the next step? And I thought, I would like right now to have a cup of tea and I love banana bread. Some of you all know that work here. I would like to have that right now because this is a little bit stressful. I'm really not certain even how to answer that question. But it was really enjoyable knowing once I met with our program specialist to figure out and come up with a plan on how we're going to move forward with things. But at first, initially was, Denise needs a cup of tea because this is a bit much. All right, here we go. Let me keep going. So within the department, let me tell you some things that I saw. There was no signage here around about who are we. There was not logo to see. There was no vision statement and mission statement. There wasn't anything visible to know who is in this building. What is it that we do? But there was a lot of work on the walls, but the work on the walls related a lot to the K-12 system. However, let me tell you one thing that was really exciting that I did see. When the program was heavily embedded with TEA, and we were under TEA, we have to celebrate that there were a lot of awards given to this department under TEA. Done really well with enrollment. They had done really well with the practices. They were recognized locally within the college. They had done really outstanding work with that. And so we don't want to put that aside and not recognize that. I saw it. I saw the trophies. I saw the signages. I saw all of it and celebrated with congratulations and celebrated with them on that because it was a monumental feat to be able to get those awards. Coming in and knowing that, I knew I had to tread lightly into maneuvering over into the new era that we were in with TWC, while continuing to acknowledge the work that was done prior to my arrival. I really want to emphasize that a lot of work was done. So it's not as though the department wasn't doing, it was doing really well. Now we're just transitioning to another governance. And how are we going to do just as well with the same group of people? So there's going to be a huge learning curve, and how are we going to do that? So that was really exceptionally important. There again, I'll talk about wasn't a strong collegiate environment that we were in. And then the other was the image of adult education and the reputation, though, of being on the campus as well. What some of the things that were happening on the campus as well, it wasn't in such a positive light. So I knew I had a lot of work to do to change our imagery, not only of adult ed, but who we were and what we were going to produce. And I needed to do that relatively quickly. The relatively quickly portion comes, I had 1 year to change all of these facets about the department, about what we were going to do differently, and about moving forward into institutionalizing this department. In 1 year, I had to think about, is this feasible to be able to do this? And if it is feasible, then what am I going to do? What am I going to do to be able to do it? All right, I'm going to pause for just a second and answer any questions, if there are any, in the chat before we get into what the strategies were that I chose to do to get into institutional department. That was so hard. I want you all to know too, to talk about the challenges. It makes me weep a little, but here we go.
Well, we don't have any questions at this moment, Dr. Perdue, but they might be coming in and I'll share those with you. We do have a comment from Catherine Nervais, and she says that she had worked at 3 separate higher ed, adult ed institutions and found people who did not understand pedagogy versus andragogy, which is a very important point that she's making.
Yes.
And I must say, Dr. Perdue, that with you sharing this experience, I mean, you really are pulling back the veil and sharing, those the first day on the job, really, when you said you started Friday and then Monday, here you go. Here you have the welcome wagon and trying to figure out what you're going to do next.
Yes. Yes.
So appreciate that. We don't have any other questions or comments at this time. So I think everyone is just listening intently.
Awesome. Good. Okay. Well, here are the practices. I'm going to give you 10 strategies. These are the 10 top strategies that I chose, and they're in no specific order. These are just the things that I needed to do in order to meet the outcome, which of course was institutionalization. So let's begin. So the first one, action step, is I sought to determine institutionalization knowledge gaps within department personnel. So remember earlier I spoke about what do you know about adult education? And what is your job? What are you doing? And how do you think this aligns to what it is that we're doing with higher education? How does this align with what you do with getting our students over to actually getting an additional certificate or getting a degree? Odessa College now has bachelor's degrees that are offered. How are you understanding how we're going to get our students from one place to the next? So I needed to find out where those gaps were. Then I had to create a practice to fill those gaps. But first I needed to know what they were. So I went around and I spoke to everybody. I had a notepad and pencil, and then lots part of it was I'm sitting and I'm talking and I'm listing. What is it that you do? And do you understand what your job is and how it relates to institutionalizing? I didn't use institutionalization. I used the term of getting our students a degree. How do you know that what you're doing is assisting them into getting that? So therefore, talking that to folks about what it is that they did. What do you do specifically? I looked over everyone's personnel file. Not only did I need to know if they were teaching in the field that they need to be teaching in, or in the position that they knew that I knew that they could be in to work more in. So I needed to know what else could they do besides what they were currently doing. Is there an opportunity to expand their practice in terms of how we're bringing in other students? Can they do something else as well that would benefit the department as a whole? So I forged through them and wrote notes on who could do what, and did I feel that that would be a really good fit? You and I both know that it's really important to align people into positions that they will do well at. Sometimes we know, and we're going to get to talk about this a little bit more too, that people are in positions because this is what I think I can do. But let's see if there's something else that you can do that would align with the mission and the journey that we're taking of institutionalizing. I also traveled to all of the sites, and that was really important because they didn't have any visitors that were there. So I wanted them to meet me and also know that I was supporting them in all that they needed to do in order to benefit the students, and then migrating them through to be their best selves, which was institutionalizing. So I needed to meet them. They needed to meet me. We needed to have some conversation. We needed to have some fun and laughter, etc. And there's this joke that goes around the campus as well that everyone knows on campus. Hey, Denise, are you headed out? Because we have some Bush's chicken waiting for you. Bush's chicken is in it. And so we can talk about that privately, how Denise Perdue feels about Bush's chicken. Okay, we won't say that in public, right? Okay. Action step 2 is I determined what I could do in 1 year to report compliance. Compliance was, I knew it was a significant part that we needed to have done, but also I knew it was just a part of the institutionalizing. So when I say with compliance, literally, we needed to get out of the red zone. If we can get to the yellow zone, I'd be really happy. But you know what? We got to the green zone. So I was super excited about that. I aligned personnel with their skills. Remember, I combed through. I needed to make sure that they were aligned with the position that they would be the most successful in. Sometimes, even though they're believing that this is I can do this. This is my job. This is what I'm doing. What else can you do? And maybe let's see if we can put you in something more aligned that you were even unaware of. And let's see if we can be successful with that. I was able to see that significantly. So that was great. I created a communication model, discussion model. And I'll talk about that some more in detail too, but I'll introduce it as this. I needed to separate people out from their specific jobs. And so what I did was I put a group together that could talk about the needs of the institution, what OC was requiring. Now I can't even say OC anymore because of the institutionalization part of it. I'll talk to you about that. But what do we need to know that on the credit bearing side that we're not doing in order to get our students there? So I needed to create a communication stream, and how was I going to do that? So I'll talk about that in a second. And then I met with all of the governing bodies. I met with the president, I met with the deans, I met with many, many, many instructors. I met with Willie Taylor, who's the CEO here of Workforce Solutions in the Permian Basin. Met with him a couple of times, delightful conversations that we had. I loved Willie to tell me too, and said, Denise, you need to do this quickly. And I said, I know. And he says, you have my support, 100%. Superb with that. I met with institutional effectiveness. I needed to know about what the strategic plan was for the college. I read through the QEP. I read through our grant. I read through so many documents that I needed to know about linking all of this together and making sure that what we were doing was in complete alignment. So that was really important because we're reporting to these governing agencies, and we need to make sure that they are okay with what it is what it is that we're doing is okay. But the other part was I needed to hear from them. What do you need from us to do? What have you been looking for? What have you seen that we can do better? What would you like us to do differently? I needed to hear from that. So I took really good notes on that as well to be able to bring that forth to a specific team. Okay, so action step number 3 is I had a professional development session. Now, this part, everyone, was so much fun. This part was a full day professional development session. There were breakout sessions, and each person or persons were selected in the department to do a specific job in a breakout session. So part of what I learned from this was I also needed to build the efficacy of the employees here. So I heard a lot of, I don't know how to do that. I'm not sure about that. Or we've never done that before. No, don't do that. So we did, and they were astonishing. It was phenomenal. Some created PowerPoints for their breakout sessions. There was a schedule, there was food. Let me interject in here. The food was paid for with local funds. I can hear you all squirming right now. Local funds paid for the food, did not come out of our grant funds. So that was a great portion of that. But the other was I gave people responsibility to make this event happen. It was not on me. I needed folks to know that you can do this. We can create a great event for us, for all of us, to come together and get to know each other. This was the other significant portion. Everyone, except I think it was either 1 or 2 persons, were able to come. All of the persons from the extension sites were there. It was the entire department as a whole was there for the half a day, which was really great because they had not met each other. They didn't know each other. They hadn't seen each other. So it was really important that they had to mingle and integrate with each other. Then in these small groups, when we went around to learn something about the department, They were in smaller groups and could continue with communicating. Then had breakout sessions, food, conversation. It was fantastic. Mr. Willie Taylor came and opened for us and talked about the needs of the area and what he saw to do, and also to congratulate us in advance of doing great work that's needed in this area. The other is that we had people from outside of our department join us as well, and they were able to migrate through some of the sessions as well. It was a great day for folks to meet me and for me to introduce adult education, higher education, and workforce initiatives. So there was intent on all of these action steps that I did in order for our department to be institutionalized. There had to be a plan in place, and this action step was significant. We can all do a lot of over some food, right? So it was a lot of fun. All right, action forward. So this is the significant part that I told you about earlier that was really key. I put together what's called a support team. The support team is specifically to support instructors. So if we don't have instructors, we don't have a program. We really don't. They are significant. So we needed to hear what they needed and then provide what they needed, and then to hear how we can support them better, i.e., one of the things is for sure is the faculty members, some of that, they needed supplies. Well, what supplies do you need? They needed textbooks, or they needed material for the students. They also wanted to understand their schedule better. They also wanted to know what are some best practices for teaching. They were keeping these thoughts and ideas to themselves. So we aligned PDs, or we aligned PD sessions with what they were asking for. So it was no longer generalized. They would say, I need to learn how to do differentiated instruction, for example. So that particular instructor would need to take a PD on that. Or I would need to learn something else. Or all of the things that they were asking for, we needed to provide that for them, because the only thing I wanted them to do was to teach, to learn how to teach better, and to do a lot of research on teaching their content. They needed time to do that as opposed to work on a lot of other things administratively. So this team removed a lot of their work that was beyond the teaching in order for them to be able to develop their curriculum. That was significant. I believe that by developing their curriculum, then that would be the integration portion into institutionalization as well. Those students would understand what this meant in terms of having very high-end developed curriculum for their courses. And it worked out really, really well. So it's supporting those team members, which was really key. All right, step 5, I invited credit-bearing instructors to teach courses. This, my friends, is significant. And why is it significant? Because remember I told you I had 1 year to institutionalize the department. I needed instructors that already knew what a syllabus was to be teaching, that already knew about curriculum development to be teaching immediately. I needed them into the department without having to train them on areas that to build the course structure, the curriculum. They came in and were off and running immediately. I needed them to be in specific spots in order for that to happen. This is the other thing that took place. I needed them to be an example of so the students would know what it's going to be like to be taught by an instructor on the credit-bearing side. What are the expectations? They were high. The instructors were beyond professional, prepared, knowledgeable, had the skills, and went and developed, have just been a tremendous asset to the department. But they were also an asset to other instructors, because the other instructors asked them questions. Well, how do you do that? How do you teach this content to this level or to this group of students? And they were able to share that. And they did share that. And you know what else that did? That brought us into community. It developed our community of learners. It developed our community of action. It developed our community of research. How do I do that research? They did exactly what needed to happen in terms of bringing in that not only professionalism, but also that knowledge on the content and also what happens in higher education and what our students would be coming into. They've helped me tremendously coming in so that I would understand on the credit bearing side, how is it different from me coming from Colorado? Is there a difference there? So we had those engaging conversations as well. It's really not different, let me tell you, which is really, really great. And so the standards are high and the expectations are high as well, but their positioning was significant in order for our team to see that we are migrating over, but they weren't certain yet what we were migrating over to. But I did, which was really, this institutionalization happened with them as well. I am so appreciative of them. And guess what? They're still here doing the same great work that they started with in the first place. I did use them as great examples. They have completely also changed the culture that is here of academia. We don't see a lot of the K-12 memorabilia, if you will, that around. There is a nuance now with working with the marketing department to create an adult education and literacy development department that looks like higher education. So we're excited about those things. All right, action step 6. I told you already that I visited the sites. These were my goals. One is to allow the extension personnel to know that they were part of the college, that they were not out on their own. I needed to meet them. That was my goal, and I did that. Have a conversation with them. It really was fluid and wonderful. The goal was to ascertain and get a list from them on essential trainings that they needed, and also the supplies that they needed, and that worked out well. All right, step 7 was I scheduled time for them to be paid to develop their syllabi and their curriculum. They were paid. The other part of it as well is I believe in building this over the summer. They met, they spoke together, they worked together, they developed together. I needed that to happen without my presence being there because I needed to be able to build a community of scholars, and that happened really, really well. Action step 8. I observed team members again in their positions in order to align with their needs. This is one thing that was really interesting too, is I gathered anecdotal and quantifiable data. I gathered exit points as well. If a student came in and they met with this person, is that going to be an exit point or an access point based upon their role? Would they be able to do their role for what this student needs, or does another person need to be in that role and then we move them to something else? So that was really significant, making sure the right people were in the right position to meet the student where they were in order to migrate them on to the next levels that they were going to be in. So that was really, really key. And their initial contact was significant. That worked out really well as well. Number 9, we only have 2 more. This one and one more is I removed access from folks. And we held discussions and I encouraged trainings on pertinent portals and the usage of such information. But when I arrived, everyone had access to everything. So I needed to narrow that in who has access to what, who is going to hold what job. So when a person calls, they need to connect to this person because they have a plethora of information. So what that's really creating is beginning to create that one voice and that one piece of information. Key personnel were assigned to specific positions with specific roles to accomplish those goals. And actually, out of all of that, a new position was created called an academic program specialist. And she helps tremendously with making sure the functions of the department go around smoothly. I changed, remember I told you earlier, we were scattered all over the campus in terms of where classes were held and where they would register and all of that. That was brought back into one building, except we still hold GED classes in other parts of the campus as well. But primarily we had to have a hub where students would come in and ask questions and they would hear one voice. What was happening on the campus and what was going to happen to them as they migrate through. They needed to hear specifically what they were joining. So hearing it from this department first was significant. It improved student access, it improved program identity, and it also improved our collaborative efforts to moving it into one location, one self-service spot. All right, here's some final steps for us. The focus groups, that's what you all want to know about as well. Those focus groups were just significant for us. And this is I'm going to talk about focus groups, the design, the sample campus visit. It's hard to see it, but you'll kind of get an idea of it, and then the outcome. This is your takeaway. Please note, these are 5 pinnacle talking points that you'll need for a focus group. And I'll show you what that looked like. Talk about economic challenges of the issue in your focus groups. Talk about what happens in other communities that are institutionalizing. That's key. Talk about money, monetary benefits, moral benefits, and all of that, about programming, contextualize those experiences, and meet people where they are, not where you really want them to be. So this is how we did this, institutionalizing meeting design. It was a program specialist, the grant manager, and then focus groups. I divided them. It's hard to see, but you might be able to see. I divided groups. I invited the program specialist and grant manager onto the campus. They wanted to come early. I asked them to give me that year towards the end of the year to come, and they did, which was really gracious. And I divided them into groups of responsibility. For example, I did not align someone like from the registrar's office to meet with someone from student services. That's my timer telling me to stop talking. I know you all like that. But I didn't align people that didn't have familiar or instinct responsibilities, because that would be for naught in terms of their questions being answered. So I aligned like the registrar's office with financial aid. They would meet with the program specialist, the grant manager, took really great notes. They were able to ask whether or not we had started some processes that they needed to institutionalize our department. And they were able to not only ask me in those focus groups, but they were able to ask TWC representatives. All of the groups, we had yeses come out of them with. I didn't know that what we could do to help. How can we help? What are some other things that we can do? They were there, they were responsive. It was phenomenal. So this was about 2 pages long. They stayed for 2 days while they were here. Each day was meeting personnel throughout the campus. They took a tour of the campus. They met with key personnel, and then they met with groups and focus groups to talk about how to get our department seamlessly migrated over into being Odessa College Transitional Learning Center. Adult education and literacy practices are where they're held. So the other significant part of it as well was we were able to speak significantly to what the needs were of on the credit bearing side, and then what our needs were on this side as well. All right, so this is what happened. First of all, we got a logo that was created by the marketing department. We're so pleased with it. But let me run through really quickly some of the things that happened, because at the end of those focus groups, I got messaging from, one message was from the VP and saying, we're ready to institutionalize the department. Here are the steps, the next steps. And us to hear that was absolutely phenomenal. But each group that met with TWC representatives said yes to institutionalizing. So where are we? So we have Blackboard shells, there's colleague integration, there's corporate collaboration, there's syllabi template. We're under the Department of Instruction now. We have IDs, there's counseling, there's a sports center available to students. We have the career navigator is assigned to the department. Office supplies and all of those things are provided. There is a strategic plan that we're responsible for every year that is submitted to institutional effectiveness. There's committee invitation, hiring process invitation, the food pantry, our students can be aligned with that. There's course mapping support. Students are embedded now into credit bearing classes. There's marketing support, there's registration, assessment, orientations. All of that is a yes that we were able to get based upon institutionalizing. We're still in the process of moving forward with it as well. These are some next steps that were happening. Not going to read through those, just to know that we're still in the process of doing things. Here's some contact information for you to be able to reach me if you have any further questions.
A comment from Shanice saying, I'm sure having credit-bearing instructors also helped with buy-in from the institution as a whole when you were talking about the collaboration. So that was a good point that was shared. There weren't any questions. I'm scanning here just to make sure I didn't miss anything. There was a comment by Felicia saying, Dr. Perdue, awesome action items and information. Thanks. And Shanice also said, I love that you had various departments, non-grant funded, meet directly with TWC. Great integration strategy. So Bobby says, thanks, great presentation. Isabella says, very impressive. I didn't know much about you so much. So all the accolades are starting to come in. We do have another comment by Christy. She says, Dr. Perdue just has everything covered, so it is hard to have any questions. Amazing woman and terrific leader. Linda shares great workforce integration. Thank you, Dr. Perdue. Appreciate all the information you shared today. Kashan says, awesome information. Thank you. Good job, says Sherry. And Ivy says, thank you for working so diligently for advancing the citizens of Odessa in that region. So this is so awesome. Joe says, great. We are currently going through this integration process ourselves. Oh, that is really interesting. And we do have a question. It says, how did you assess staff's knowledge of adult education? And a second question is, how did you handle teaching staff more about adult education?
Sure. So that is my background, first of all, is adult education. And so asking, primarily starting off with anecdotal conversations, and what is it? What is adult education and literacy? And what is literacy? And who do you consider to be an adult? And then what do you see? So all of that in separate questions and separate queries, I was able to see that we were not familiar with adult education. And an adult was considered to be, because we started at the age of 16 or so, can come into the department. But what really characterizes an adult? What are their practices? What do they do? What are their experiences? So we looked at defining andragogy versus pedagogy. Remember, pedagogy is what do I need to know, and for this particular content. And then andragogy goes into the experiences of the adult learner that's brought back into educational realm. So asking them if they were familiar with those specific terms, and that wasn't the case. So what do we do? So I started with, first of all, talking about in our sessions that we would meet in. We had PD sessions. I would align PD sessions with the language of what adult education is. I would talk the language of adult education, of higher education. I would use the terminology every day and ask and wait for the question to come. What does that mean? What does that term mean? So it's not just hearing it, but it's using it. I have books. I put books around in my office so people could see what I was reading, and that relates to education as a whole, learning as a whole. In emails, I sent emails that were related to education. I sent out in terms of messages that would ask a question to a faculty or a staff member. It was phrased and formatted academically. I would use quotes in certain areas to reference academician that I believe it was everything in my office is related to, it looks like higher education as opposed to my home office, because I needed, when students came in as well, to see that this is a place of higher education, and they would ask a question about it. So everything that I did was based upon an inquiry. Why is that so much as well? Because we don't read a lot. We live in a culture where there's not a lot of reading. So I needed to bring that back. The way to start it was a conversation. I forgot the second question. What was the second one?
Well, I think you answered it because you said, how did you handle teaching staff more about adult education? So I think you did address it, and you were pretty much contextualizing higher ed as well as adult ed. I do want to read off one of the comments that we also have here from And Savino from TWC, she says, great specifics on how you made this happen. Congratulations on an excellent presentation, a lot of deep dives into structure across your system, and really appreciate how you broke down what you did. Good question. So thank you so much, Anne. And Dr. Perdue, I just want to thank you
You're
for a
welcome.
wonderful presentation. It was chock full of lots of robust information and strategies. And I gotta say, you really put yourself out there. So thank you to you and your team, because this would not have been possible without the engagement of your team, right? You wouldn't
Right.
have been here to share about the wonderful growth that has happened. And so thank you to the people from Odessa who are on the call right now. Thank you, Dr. Perdue.
You're welcome.
Phenomenal job. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody.